Hello, if you want to know what's going on, find yourself a CIA veteran, and we've got one, the one and only Ray Mcgovern. Let's talk. Hello, Garland Nixon here with Ray Mcgovern, and once again, I've received a lot of notes and emails and stuff like that from people after my Moats show Monday, and so I want to thank everybody for all of the kind words that I've gotten. I really appreciate that. I had a wonderful time, and who knows? Hope it'll happen again sometime. Now, let's get down to the important stuff today. President Putin and President Trump talked. There's been much ado about that. To me, not a lot was said, but sometimes a lot can be said when not a lot is said. So Ray Mcgovern was a long-time CIA analyst. That's right. Ray was the guy who actually talked to the president of the United States and said, here's what's going on. He's a guy that tried to figure out what was going on between the Russians and the Soviets. He pranced around Europe. He knows all kinds of stuff about stuff. So, Ray, what are your thoughts on the talk today? It seems to me that a lot was said. I don't know what came out of it. But the only thing I really know is I understand some kind of an agreement not to attack infrastructure, which, Ray, let's your thoughts on this. I think this was interesting stuff.
Thanks, Garland. Thanks for having me back. Lots of stuff happened today. What you just mentioned, the renewal of the genocide in Gaza, the renewed promise to release the JFK information that has been suppressed. What's going on? And turns out to be the most hopeful thing was this conversation on the phone between Putin and Trump. Now, you're quite right. The only concrete thing that came out of it was a promise by Putin to lay off hitting energy infrastructure for 30 days. Now, what does that say? It says to me that Putin wants to project an image of willingness to compromise, a willingness to deal, but there's no indication at all that he's willing to back off his terms, which are very clear, which were expressed by him in June of last year, and which require the Ukrainians to kind of say, all right, well, you've got the upper hand now. You've got 4 aces. We've got a pair of deuces. All right. What we'll have to do to get a ceasefire is what you said we had to do. Now, Putin had, he had some options here. He and other higher level Russians had already made clear 1,000 times there's not going to be any ceasefire. Not any ceasefire right off the bat. So Rubio goes out over to talk to the Ukrainians and says, oh, my, hey, how about a ceasefire? Now, I don't think Rubio knows what's really going on here. In any case, when Steve Witkoff, the guy who deals with Putin, directly with Putin, because he's a direct emissary of President Trump and has his ear, when he saw Putin the next day, Putin could have said, look, I told you guys, I told you that this ceasefire is for the birds. Get out of here. Go back and tell the president, when he's serious, come and talk to me. Not now. You got these crazy people talking about crazy things. Stop it. He didn't do that. And that's a hopeful sign. Whether Zelensky and those crazy Europeans are able to sabotage peace, God knows. But I don't think they'll be able to sabotage peace for very long. partly because they don't have the money to do it, partly because people get wise to the fact that Russia is not really going to take over Ukraine, all of it, much less Poland or the Baltic states or all this stuff that they say. Meanwhile, the New York Times and the Washington Post are still saying crazy things, so Americans won't be able to understand what's really going on. And they will try to make it out that Trump is giving the game away even before it starts, And that needs to be a kind of re-education exercise, and that's where you and I come in, and hopefully others that are doing this kind of work in alternative media to tell the American people, look, you've been had. The Russians have legitimate grievances. And while I think of it, a very, very interesting thing happened today. It went under the radar. But Angela Merkel, okay, she's been under criticism. She was the former chancellor of the Federal Republic of Germany. She's been under criticism for saying things like, maybe we should listen to what Putin says. As a matter of fact, here, I think, have it right here. There is a little lapel button with the words on it. And I'll see if I can put it up there so you can see it. There you are. Putin verstehe, okay? I picked that up in Germany about 9 years ago. What does it mean? Verstehe means understand. You understand Putin, or one who understands Putin. And when I picked this up, I said, oh, this is good news. I didn't think that this was a popular thing in Germany. My friend said, Ray, put that in your pocket right away. That's a pejorative. A Putin verstehe is a guy who's in Putin's pocket, for God's sake. So no. Well, what does Angela Merkel say this week? She says, that's wrong. That's completely wrong. And people are accusing me of Putin verstehe, but I'll tell you that I never gave in to the Russians in any way, but we still have to put ourselves into the shoes of the Russians and look at what they're saying, because this whole Ukrainian thing, you can't say that part of it isn't to blame on Western behavior. Wow, big hue and cry in Germany. So isn't it interesting? Maybe, just maybe, Angela Merkel has a conscience. And she knows that she played a major role in the major betrayal when she and the French President Hollande decided that they would say they would guarantee a ceasefire and various other conditions, including autonomy for some of the Russian-speaking areas in Ukraine. And then they diddled and diddled for 8 years. 8 years they diddled and diddled. And Putin put his trust in them. He saw them. There were wonderful photos of them all together. This was the answer, okay? But it wasn't enforced. And the U.S. and others blamed the Russians for not enforcing it. Russia had nothing to do. They weren't the signatory to this. The French and the Germans were supposed to, and the Ukrainians, of course, they were supposed to talk to the delegates from Donetsk and Lugansk as well. Well, long story short, Angela Merkel, 2 years ago now, in a conversation, said, look, that wasn't for real, that Minsk deal. We just used it as a time saver. We needed time. The Ukrainian army wasn't worth very much at the beginning of this Minsk process. Now look at it. NATO armament, NATO training. Now look at it. So it was really just a delaying mechanism until they were ready to fight. Wow. She said that publicly. A month later, François Hollande, said the same thing. Okay. Now, this didn't get much press in the West, but my God. So what did Putin say after all this? He said publicly, I shouldn't have trusted I put my hope in this. And, they diddled me. This is sort of a betrayal. It's not going to happen again. Okay. And in the last analysis, when he was betrayed in another way, most people don't know this, but there was an agreement that Biden made personally when he was without his associates there on the 30th of December, 2021, not to put offensive strike missiles in Ukraine. He said that. He told Putin that on the 30th of December, 2021. What happens? Well, there are negotiations in Geneva, and our side, under Wendy Sherman, pretends they had never heard of this. And finally, Lavrov, the foreign minister, tracks down Tony Blinken, also in Geneva. Say, hey, Tony, what about that undertaking that your president made on the 30th of December, 2021? And Blinken says, look, the president was home alone. It was Christmas time. He was in Delaware. I wasn't with him. Jake Sullivan wasn't with him. So forget about it. We have every right to put offensive strike missiles in Ukraine, and we will do it if the Ukrainians ask us to, because they have the right to ask it. We have the right. And besides, we could talk maybe about limiting the numbers of the missiles, but forget about the rest of it. Well, that was the 21st of January, 2022. And you know what happened just a month later. That was one key reason. The Ukrainian army, well equipped and well trained by then, was right on the border of Luhansk and Donetsk, all ready to come in. We have the European figures. What is it called? The Office of Security and Cooperation Europe organization. Okay, they noticed a tenfold increase in shelling of Lugansk and Donetsk cities. Okay, in the 2 weeks before the special military operation. So Americans don't know all this. Americans don't know even just a little bit of this. And I see it as our function to make sure they do, or make sure they have this information available to them. Because every time the New York Times Post says, well, this was completely unprovoked, it was full-scale invasion, and it was illegal. Okay. Well, it was provoked. I mean, the evidence of that is abundant. Was it full-scale? Give me a break. There were, most people think, about 90,000 Russian troops, boys, at the Ukrainian border. When they went in, their objective was to scare the pants off Zelensky. And did they succeed? Yes, they succeeded. Zelensky appointed his best friend, the head of his political faction in the Ukrainian parliament, to negotiate with him. And he did. Did they come to an agreement? Yes, they did. When? Late March, early April. Ceasefire. No Ukraine in NATO. Limits on buildup with armaments. They would put the issue of Crimea and the other stuff in the future. And what people don't know is it was the U.S. and the UK that told Zelensky, no, don't do that. Don't do that. Because if you do that, we won't support you for as long as it takes, okay? Well, now is the time, is as long as it takes. And we have a president now who can reason a little bit more sensibly. And so there is hope with respect to Ukraine. The Russian media is very, very laudatory about the results of today's meeting. We in the West, of course, will be treated to all kinds of tales about betrayal on the part of Trump and being in Putin's pocket. But that's just not even the half of today's story, Garland. I'm an American just as much as you are. and you just as much as I am. And to think that we Americans have a government that supports, enables, and arms genocide, it's just too much for me to bear. And I think, what genocide has been resumed in Gaza. It could not have been resumed without Netanyahu counting on the blessing of our president, not only the blessing, but the 2,000-pound bombs, the 1,000-pound bombs, all this other stuff. And the objective, what genocide is destroying a whole people. And they're well on their way. They're about a quarter of the way, as I figured from the statistics. Do they want to kill all the people, all the Palestinians in Gaza? That sounds strange, doesn't it? Do they want to kill them all? Well, not the ones that will die of natural causes because they starve to death. Those all right. We don't want to kill them, okay? But as one wag said today, well, I guess they got tired of waiting for them all to starve, so it's time to use kinetic energy again and start. And this is just so much a disgrace to our government as well as the Israelis that it's got to be stopped somehow. And maybe we could talk about what you and I and others might be able to do to try to stop it.
Ray, one of the things I did want to ask you about was this, and this is an issue. The lunatics before we get to Gaza, I think it's important. It's about what's going on. I did have a question for you. The lunatics, the Starmers, Macrons, et al. Right? The women, the women, I call them the Nazi princesses, Kaja Kallas and Annalena Baerbock and von der Leyen, right? These people they don't want peace. They want World War III, and it's absolute lunacy because they don't have the military wherewithal to do it, and they don't even have the support by their own people who don't want to go to war and die. But that doesn't seem to bother them. Here's my point. The day before the Riyadh summit, 300 and some drones and missiles and things were fired at Moscow. And I thought they needed targeting for that MI6. I just thought MI6. I thought that's the Brits. That's MI6. I'm suspicious that the Brits, the MI6, I'm a believer that Zelensky is more the Brits, the MI6's boy, even than he was Biden's, because let's face it, who was it that went and told him to put the kibosh on it? It was Bojo. Where does he always run when he argues with Trump? He goes to London. That he's an MI6 creation just as much, if not more, than Biden. That's where he feels his home is. That out of the MI6, out of the Brits. It seems to me. It seems to me that the Trump people, for whatever reason, they got a fight on their hands. And the fight is not just a bunch of idiots. The fight is they've got some Five Eyes kind of people. They've got some intelligence people who are up to no good also, and who will use their intelligence abilities, assets, etc., to try to thwart Donald Trump. What do you think about that, being an intelligence guy?
Well, Trump, of course, suffered from that for 4 whole years during his first term. So he's aware of that now. However, the deep state is very deep, okay? And even though he's put pretty decent people at the top, Tulsi Gabbard and what's his name, the head of the John, head of the CIA. Anyhow, he put his own people in there that are loyal.
Ratliff, I think.
And so there's a chance that he can turn this thing around. But, when you talk about the British, they got nothing to offer in this equation except hugs and kisses to Zelensky. The same with Macron. It's almost laughable, okay? The Europeans think that they can come in and substitute for what the U.S. has been doing, billions and billions and hundreds of billions of dollars and armaments stuff to kazoo. They can't do it. So they're living in an unreal, they're delusional. Now, I remember reading Ayn Rand way back when, and she said very poignantly, and this is very much to the point, you can ignore reality, but you can't ignore the consequences of ignoring reality. That speaks to me because there are consequences of being as stupid as these hacks have been. Some Russian leaders are calling them pygmies as head of the states in Europe. Even among them, there are very sensible people, people in Slovakia, Hungary, some people in Romania until they've been clamped down on. So NATO is in disarray. No matter how much Thelma beats his breast and says, we're going to help out here. They not only, they can't, but even if they tried, their economies would go like that. Their social benefits would go the same way. There's no way that the Ukrainians can be bailed out. And to give them the notion that they can, well, that's the cardinal sin, That's what Biden, that's what Obama warned them against. 2015, 10 years ago, right? What he said was, look, the worst thing we can do for the Ukrainians is give them the idea that they could succeed in a war against a much more powerful Russia. Well, there it is right there. Everything else is just a fool's errand. The only profiteers here, the only cui bono folks, are the people who are making the weapons. Now, interestingly enough, people making the weapons in the United States, not doing so good. I mean, look at the stock plummet from people like Lockheed and Raytheon and all of the. I mean, if the prospect of not being able to sell a lot of more arms to Europe, because Europe wants to do it themselves, they've got their own military industrial complex. Thank you very much. Okay. The European stock zooming up. And last but not least, you probably know, Berlin, maybe your listeners don't, but Volkswagen, which used to make those little cars, remember when we were kids, all right? And now they make lots of nice cars, but they can't sell them anywhere. And so what are they doing? They're closing down their automotive lines. They're going to build tanks. They're going to build armored personnel carriers. And their CEO has said, yeah, this is the growth industry for us now. We'll build some cars in China maybe, but we're not going to build it. We're just doing what we get a lot of money for, $80 billion for them. This is a big deal. So it's corrupt as hell, and people are suffering, including people on the battlefield in Ukraine. Ukrainians more than Russians, but these are human beings. Why can't people be human and say, all right, let's make the best deal we can, but let's stop getting people killed?
I think you're right. Let me ask you this. Do you think that we'll 7 more minutes and we'll be halfway in? Because an hour good with you for you?
Yeah, that's good.
Okay, so we're at 23. All right. What happens? Look, I think it's one thing's pretty clear. As amicable as the Russians are, I think they look at it like this. This is existential to us. And this is a one-shot deal. If we don't get the deal we want now, we're screwed, and I think they're right. Do you think that as they hold out, to me, it weakens the Ukrainian militarily. And as they drag this thing on, there seems to be some element of, with the Russians, maybe with the Americans too. Okay, we need to talk about this. We need to put together a committee. Well, I used to work for the state. I was in a police department. I was a bureaucracy. I know the bureaucracies. And when somebody starts saying, let's put together an expert committee, usually they want some time to pass by from one reason or another. So now one of the things I heard today is we're going to put together a team of experts to work on X. I worked with the governor's office for a long time. And it was called talk about bureaucracy. I ran what was called the Homeland Security. Oh, what the heck was it called? Something planning committee or something for the state. It was a completely wasted bureaucratic committee that actually, I could tell you some stories about that would be hilarious. Like making manuals that were completely with nothing in them, but like a table of contents. But at any rate, the bottom line is this. I detect a little of that. I detect a little of the Russians thinking, because I was a bureaucrat, maybe we need to soften the battlefield up a bit. Maybe we need to take some little more areas to get to the point where we need to be. And then we'll be ready to talk, but we aren't quite ready. And when I hear somebody say, we've put together a team of experts so we can begin talking. And every time Donald Trump or the Americans talk to the Russians, they always say, okay, next time we're going to begin. And I'm thinking, well, I thought you began now. Seems to me, I'm just saying, Ray, I've been a bureaucrat before, and the Russians are really good at bureaucracy. I don't think they're in a rush. I think it seems to me they want to take certain areas, or they want to create a reality on the ground. And then there'll be anyway, what are your thoughts on that? Maybe I'm wrong. Your thoughts?
Well, Garland, first on this existential matter, I hate to keep quoting Obama, but he said this as well. Look, for the Russians, this is an existential threat. That's why I'm not putting offensive strike missiles or offensive missiles of any kind in Ukraine. Okay, it's not an existential threat to us, says Obama, and we really ought to be careful about how much we bite off on other people's existential threat. We ought to limit our commitments so they meet our national needs, not somebody else's. Well, it's eminent good sense. Now, Obama wasn't sensible about everything, but on that he had some good sense, and he pretty much deprived offensive missiles from going into Ukraine for those reasons. Curiously enough, you may remember Angela Merkel, who I talked about before, the federal chancellor, the chancellor of Germany, was in the U.S. for discussions with Obama, and he was under great pressure to give offensive weapons to Ukraine. And so they were at a joint press conference, and one of the reporters said, "Now, Mr. Obama, Mr. President, are you going to give finally offensive missiles to Ukraine?" And he starts to talk. He says, "Well, we have a committee," and Angela Merkel says, "Eine schlechte Idee." This is a lousy idea. It says right there, And then Obama continues to talk about, well, we have that under consideration. About 5 minutes later, and she's eine schlechte Idee again. Well, she knows eine schlechte Idee. Obama leaves. Biden comes in. Does it become a good idea then? My God, what kind of patsy are these Europeans that should stand up on their own feet and say, "Eine schlechte Idee"? We're not gonna do it. Instead, they dovetail. So that's number one. Now, how the Russians look at this, they have their programmatic, they have their strategy in line. The new English word that I've learned is a trip. They're not in any hurry. They don't give a rat's patootie about how much land they gain in a month. Their job is demilitarization. So the way they calculate success is how many Ukrainian army pieces they put out in a month, okay? If they only gain a kilometer, if they kill 10,000 Ukrainian forces, that's demilitarization. Now, denazification is harder because the Nazis are in there pretty tough and hard. And it's going to take I notice the latest polls say most Ukrainians don't support the war anymore. They see that this is crazy. And so it may be just a matter of time before the generals who have been partly responsible for all this, but can blame it on Zelensky, will rise up and say, all right, uh, we'll put up the white flag so no more people get killed. The Ukrainian population, what's left of it, will rejoice and will accept whatever terms we can negotiate. I think that's likely. I had thought that was likely sooner than now, but maybe that's going to play out next couple of months. I hope so, because what really has to happen is an end to the fighting. That's why the ceasefire had a certain superficial appeal. You know, you can really sell that. That's a big PR thing. But Putin turned out a ceasefire. Well, as he himself pointed out, you can't have a ceasefire like tomorrow or even next month. You got to figure out all the dynamics of it, who's going to supervise it, what happens when people violate it. And it's extremely, extremely involved and complicated to do this kind of thing. So that was just PR. Why Trump let Rubio indulge in that kind of PR when these are such serious matters? I don't know. Maybe Rubio was listening to somebody else in the National Security Council, but he was way off base. And when the next day, when Steve Witkoff arrived, I think he and Putin kind of agreed. Okay, look, I speak for Trump. Trump is going to ask for some sort of thing that looks like a concession. Maybe you could stop hitting the energy infrastructure. We think that, and of course, that's what's come out of this meeting. But the Russians, I would emphasize, are making more of this than that one concession. They're saying, finally, we have somebody sensible in the White House that we can deal with, who can see our problems. And they didn't say this today, but they know that Trump has already said, I can see why the Russians don't want to arm to the teeth Ukraine on their border. I can understand that they wouldn't want that. Well, God, that's 80% of the necessary understanding right there. The rest is in the details. So I'm hopeful. I'm still hopeful that the U.S. new policy will bring peace of a kind to Ukraine. I'm not at all. Well, I'm just distraught on what's happening in Gaza and in other areas. There's not much good news. And when you look at how subservient Trump is to Netanyahu, well, I've seen that before. I've seen many. I served under 7 presidents, for God's sake, and there have been several since. Okay, I've never seen it so transparent that here Trump takes part of the credit for negotiating this complicated ceasefire thing. And then, although some people thought that, well, Netanyahu might be a little bit reluctant to just willy-nilly violate it, well, no, forget about it. And this brings up something that Americans really ought to know. 2 days ago, on the 16th of March, 2003, it was 3 days before the U.S. and UK forces went into Iraq. And there was a young American volunteer there. Her name was Rachel Corrie. She was with an international nonviolent movement just to bear witness to what was going on there. She had stayed at this house on a hilltop in Rafah, that little town at the bottom of Gaza, with 2 Palestinian families, young families with little kids. And then the bulldozer came, driven by 2 Israelis, okay? Giant bulldozers, made in Peoria, Illinois, okay? Caterpillar ones, okay? So the Israelis stopped. When Rachel stops in front of them, she says, stop, they'll do this. And they talk back and forth to headquarters. what's the calculations here? Well, we haven't bulldozed any international volunteers yet, just Jewish volunteers. But maybe, yeah, here, a couple of days we're going to have a war. People will be so distracted. And the Americans won't say, diddly, go ahead. He runs her over, and then he has instructions back up over and make sure her back is broken. And it was in full sight of other volunteers who got her to a hospital as soon as possible, but she was dead. Okay. Now, why do I mention that? Well, uh, Rachel's father and mother and I had a really nice lunch for about 3 hours, about a year later. And I saw this uh, little bracelet on Craig Murray, her father, and I had an orange bracelet. He says to me, "Ray, what's that orange bracelet there?" I said, "Well, it's identify me with torture people, what's going on in Guantanamo." I said, "What's that red? What's that green thing?" So he took it off. Hard to take off here. And they said, "Read it, Ray." So I read it. And it said, Rachel Corrie, April 10, 1979, March 16, 2003. That's it. Okay. He looked at me. He saw I was moved. He said, "Would you like to have that, Ray?" I said, "Well, yes, but do you have other?" "Yes, I have several others." I've been wearing this thing, Garland, for 21 years. Now, some of them broke, but Craig Corey's always good for sending me replacements. They're not very fancy things. They're plastic or something. Okay? Why do I mention this? Well, in the Catholic faith that I grew up in 100 years ago, there was something called a sacrament, and there was something called a sacramental. Now, a sacramental was this kind of thing: some object, or something that would a prayer, or something that would remind you and give you grace or give you the courage to be more of a follower of Christ than you have been before. So when I'm in the Senate, like and I see my former colleague come in with Gina Haspel, proved, documented torturer, head of the first torture site in Thailand, very well known to the Senate committee members who are going to nominate her to be head of the CIA. And they're all coming in there. And the senators try to obfuscate the whole thing. Well, did you give the order for those torture techniques there in Thailand? Well, we have to go into a secret session. So I get up and I look at this. I say, "Well, look, Mcgovern, what kind of wimp are you, huh? What kind of wimp? Rachel Corrie, she wouldn't be sitting down in this. You're not going to get run over by a bulldozer, Mcgovern. You're going to get beat up probably, and they're going to put you in jail maybe for a while." And so it gives me courage. That's why it's a sacramental, an object that gives me the courage, the grace of courage to do things that Rachel Corrie did. Now, why do I mention all that stuff? Well, because Rachel was not the first indication that the Israelis are convinced they can get away with murder literally, okay, even though they kill a bunch of Americans. Why do I mention that? Well, we have the USS Liberty incident there in June 8th of 1967. And that much is pretty much known to a lot of people, but suffice it to say that there was a U.S. intelligence collective that was off Gaza, okay, and was monitoring what the Israelis were doing toward the end of their 6-day war. Found out, among other things, that they were massacring Egyptian prisons right offshore there, okay? And also that they were going to go up into the Golan Heights. And we're, keeping Washington informed. Long story short, Israeli aircraft reconnoitered them in the morning of June 8th and sent fighter bombers and 2 torpedo boats to sink it, okay, later that day. That was deliberate. We have a cockpit to tower communication. So, oh, but there's an American flag there. Follow your orders, destroy it. And they tried mightily to destroy the USS Liberty. Now, what happened? Well, they poured napalm on the deck. They shot out, first thing they did was shot out all the radar that they knew was up there, all of the functioning radar. And then it was so it was so bad that this young seaman went up to Captain McGonigal and said, "Captain, you know that radar that we couldn't get working there in the morning? Well, I think I can get that working. I got some wire here, and permission requested to fix that radar." McGonigal says, "Yeah, what do you do? Swim through that napalm?" "Permission requested, sir." Permission granted. He goes out with these, well, in the infantry, we call them field expedients, right? A bunch of baling wire and some electrical stuff. Fixes up the radar. They send out a SOS. My God, the Sixth Fleet gets that message right away. The Israelis, of course, intercept it, and they say, "Oh, damn!" And they leave. The patrol, the torpedo boats, like that. The planes as well. That's not the end of the story. The head of the commander, naval commanders of 2 aircraft carriers, send their fighter bombers to do battle with whoever is attacking their ship, a U.S. ship, and they get a call. The admiral gets a call from Washington. It's the president himself. "I want you to call back those fighter bombers. We don't want to embarrass our ally, Israel." My God, that's what went down. What was the result? Captain McGonigal was able to keep the thing afloat. They got to Malta, and they offloaded many of the wounded. 174 wounded, 34 killed. Okay. They took it to Greece, and they not only bandaged them up, but they told them not to say a word to anyone about what just happened, under pain of court-martial law, not to mention that it was the Israelis that hit us so hard. So that's the way it stands even now. One little sequel here. There was a congressman in Visalia, California, so the valley there. And he found out that Terry Carbardier, who was the young seaman I mentioned before with the baling wire, was working for him on his staff. And it became clear what Terry had prevented, in effect, for having the whole crew of 300 drowned and the ship sunk, okay? So he decided to give him a medal. But the Navy was reluctant. They're still shy to give him a medal. So they wouldn't give him the Medal of Honor, but they did give him the Civil Star, okay? So there was a meeting, and I heard about it right away because I had good friends who were Liberty alumni, so to speak, survivors, really. And I got on the next plane, went out to San Jose, and took a car down to Seattle just in time for this wonderful, wonderful little meeting in Congressman's office. You know what congressman that was? Devin Nunes. He went on to other things, he's did greater things in Congress, and now he is chairman of the President's Intelligence Advisory Board, where he can do some good because he knows where the bodies are buried. Anyhow, he was the only official in the United States Congress who had the guts to reward someone who had done this heroic feat. And he only had about 3 press people and myself, a couple other survivors, okay? And then they said, "Now, Terry, you got shot pretty bad. Let's see your back." He pulled up his shirt. My God, with an awful sight with all this shrapnel that he had in there. Then we went out to dinner, and I'll just finish this thing by saying, if you want to know what PTSD looks like, have lunch with survivors of the USS Liberty who told they couldn't tell their wives, they couldn't tell anybody what happened, and lived with that for many, many years. I think maybe I have a sorry for the interruption, but yeah, I do. It shouldn't be desecrated by holding pencils, but I've gone to these reunions, and of course, this was deliberately played down here by saying, it was just an attack, but so forth. But
Wow.
the story is the instance: 34 killed, 174 wounded, and if the Israelis weren't quite sure that they could get away with murdering Americans then in 1967, well, that was pretty much the cat's pajamas. Now, there's more to this story. This one gets me really angry because with respect to Gaza, when it was blockaded, there were some people that thought that justice was really more important than starving people. And there's a great big Turkish ship, the Mavi Marmara, in 2010, who decided to bring supplies to Gaza. And they were shot up in the high seas by Israeli Navy and patrol boats. One of the people killed was an American citizen. What did the Americans do? Zilch. Zero. Nothing more than they had done with the 34 killed on the USS Liberty. So the next year, some of my really justice-seeking Jewish friends, mostly Jewish friends, bought a boat and put it in shape. It was a U.S. boat to Gaza. Okay, now we're talking 2011. They asked me to come on the boat. I said, of course I would. Who else is coming on? Oh, we have some people in the press are coming. Aaron Matei is coming from Democracy Now! Alice Walker is coming. We have some New York Times guys coming. So this is going to be really interesting whether they shoot us up or not. Okay. Well, what I'm saying here is that I got word, as I had gotten my wife's permission to do this, and I didn't tell her right away, but I got word from a really well plugged in friend, plugged into the White House, the National Security Council. And he told me, and I wrote it up at the time, he said that, look, we're not going to do anything here at the U.S. National Security Council to protect you guys, even though you're a U.S. flag ship. So don't think you can get into trouble that we'll bail you out in, okay? If you're on board, we're not going to defend you from an attack by the Israelis. Now, a very senior staffer, two of them, the National Security Council, said that the White House planned to do nothing to protect our boat, that they would, quote, be perfectly willing to have cold corpses of activists shown on American TV, period, end quote. Now, knowing that my wife doesn't read my writings, I put that out there, okay? This is what we've been told. Why did I put out there? Because I knew the source, not the sources in the White House, but I knew this other source, okay? Now, what happens? People think this is pretty extreme. My friend, Ambassador Craig Murray, used to be a UK ambassador, okay? He wrote on his own blog, he says, while I know Ray to be an extremely honest man, I thought it was possible that his source was exaggerating. I therefore set my own diplomatic sources to work in Washington without giving them any indication of Ray's information. They came back with an independent report from a different source, not the NSC this time, but Hillary Clinton's State Department. Oh, here is it. Different source. With exactly the same result of which Ray was warned. I was told this is Craig Murray, ambassador. I was told that Obama will welcome an Israeli attack on the U.S. ship as giving him a chance to confirm his pro-Israeli credentials and improve his standing with AIPAC ahead of the presidential election race. Fatalities would, quote, not be a problem. And so, I wasn't sure of my source either, but this is from the White House. Mine were from the NSA. So people are probably interested why I'm talking now. Well, because finally, Obama couldn't persuade Netanyahu not to shoot us out of the water, as he did to the Mavi Mummer, such a big ship it didn't get shot out of the water. But they didn't shoot us up because Obama went to the Greeks. We were moored in Piraeus outside of Athens. They went to the Greeks and says, look, we got a problem here. Don't let that U.S. boat to Gaza go to Gaza. Don't let it even out of your harbor. And the Greeks said, oh, but, we have a tradition of 4,000 years of free. Look, you guys really need that IMF loan, don't you? Yeah. Do what we say. And so they found all kinds of problems with our boat. The most ridiculous one was our air conditioner. Our air conditioner didn't work really well, okay? Well, we went anyway. We pulled the anchor and darted for the Aegean Sea, and we got 9 nautical miles before these very apologetic Greek Coast Guard guys came up and said, please stop. We have orders that you have to stop. So our captain went, as I say, all of 9, and then we stopped, and we didn't know what to do. And finally, the Ninja Turtle guys came out, the ones with they're gonna board us. And the captain said, look, I'm already in trouble. I'll probably lose my license, but it looks like to save the boat and not get shot up or boarded, we ought to go back to port. And that's what we did. And they let the U.S. boat to Gaza just rot away. Nobody could save it. So that's how supine, that's how American leaders are with respect to the Israelis. And, that was bad enough. But I just have to say that watching Gaza, watching people be exterminated. I mean, that happened before I was alive during World War II. I was very little, but I knew right it was over what exactly had happened. Oh, is 2.3 million people? Is that not genocide? It's got to be 6 million. Give me a break. And we could have stopped the genocide in Nazi Germany earlier than we did. We knew about it. But we weren't responsible for it, for God's sake. I mean, we didn't arm it and enable it. So all I'm saying here is that we have to kind of look at our own sacramentals here. Mine is Rachel Corrie. And what we need to do is not nothing. What we didn't have to do is something. I have enough trust in the American people that they know what's going on. They will say, no, that's right to extinguish a whole people. And I'll just quote my friend Dan Berrigan again, who famously said, look, the difference between doing nothing and doing something is everything. And I just add, we can all do something.
Let me ask you this, Ray, also. It seems to me that there are, I connect everything. There are people who would look at this right now and say, this is a perfect opportunity to, it causes Donald Trump a lot of, he's going along with it, but it caused him a lot of grief for this reason. It's infuriating a lot of people in his coalition that supported him. You've got people now they're pushing, we've got to threaten Iran. We've got to threaten Iran will be held accountable. We're starting to hear the pro-war or Iran people, which, let's face it, if Trump started a war with Iran, that would virtually end his presidency. Because the economic, there's no telling how far it would go. And it's just an absolute disaster would end his presidency and could, who knows how bad that could get. To me, the real, I don't know the word to put it, the heroic actions are being taken by Yemen. And the Trump team are, they're going to bomb Yemen. But the one thing I can say is this: it's terrible what's happening to Yemen, but they truly believe that what they're doing is right. And I don't think the Trump team understands. They were bombed for 7 years by the Saudis. They were attacked for years by the UK, and the British Empire. The people of Yemen do not give up. And I don't think that, but from the bluster, well, the Yemenis learned the hard way, they're standing up to the United States, and we're going to fight them, and they're not ever going to stop. Your thoughts before we go, last but not least, on Yemen?
Yeah, Garland, it's amazing. There are some people that stand and fight on principle. I mean, Max Blumenthal had number 2 in Ansar Allah, the Houthis. He was interviewing him. He's trying to prove, why are you doing this? Why are you doing this? Solidarity with the Palestinians. But what do you get out of it? Solidarity with the Palestinians. It's a justice issue. Yeah, but what's in it for you? Nothing's in it for us. We're going to get bombed to hell, but we're going to do it because it's the right thing to do. Now, when there was the pause, when there was the ceasefire, the Houthis stopped. But then, when the Israelis were refusing to observe the terms of the ceasefire and deliberately starving the people in Gaza, the Houthis finally watched this and said, well, look, you're not bombing them to hell, but you're starving them to death. So we'll give you 4 days. You stop starving the people in Gaza, and we'll keep this ceasefire and not try to blockade the Red Sea. And 4 days went, and the Houthis they said, okay, time's up. It started. Now, why is the United States of America acting as Israel's agent here to bomb the hell out of these people in Yemen, this part of Yemen? It should be, Americans should know that this is the Israelis leading us by a piece of rope into doing something that is not going to make us popular in that part of the world, but it's not going to work either. And what I fear, Garland, is that whether it's the USS Harry Truman or what the USS is, I think one of them is going to be sunk. Okay. Now, it'll take more than one missile to sink it, but I think it's going to be sunk, and there'll be loss of life. And then Trump's going to be in the same position that Ronald Reagan was in when 241 Marines were killed in the barracks in Beirut, about which the Israelis had foreknowledge. Mind you, folks, they admitted that later, okay? Now, what did Reagan do? Well, he sought counsel from people with their heads screwed on right. And they said, Mr. President, it's a little quixotic to be using World War II battleships to shoot up the hills behind Beirut. I mean, it's not going to do any damn good at all. And more people could be killed, more people be kidnapped, and more people will be shot and blown up. So we would suggest that you just get the hell out of there. Get out of Dodge now. What did he do? He did it, okay? It was a sensible thing to do. Did it look bad? Well, they made it look good. You know what they did? You remember what they did right away? They took care of those communists in Grenada. Grenada was going to, remember that? I was briefing at that time. I could see what a force that was. They needed to display some force from the 82nd Airborne, what we could do. And so they invaded Grenada on the false pretense that some of our medical students were being harassed by communists. For me, Castro and his communists were in there. So all I'm saying here is that, all right. So if you have to do that, big powers do that. I don't condone it, but that But he also did the sensible thing and withdrew. Now, would Trump be able to do that? It depends on who's advising him. Marco Rubio? My God. This other guy, Mike Walsh, or whatever his name is, maybe Tulsi Gabbard. So who knows what's gonna happen on that? But that's my fear. And if a U.S. ship is heavily damaged, or worse still, sunk, there'll be casualties, and then Trump will be faced with the same thing. And whether he has the sensibility as well as the macho to do the right thing, that's really questionable. I fear for that, because that's a really, really dicey part of the world. We have we have thousands of troops around there. They're all vulnerable as can be. And so you could have a real conflagration. One thing I'll say about Iran, and I'll try to be brief. Cheney and Bush wanted to hit Iran in 2008 as their finale. Okay, they had intended to do that in 2008. People in Washington knew that kind of thing, and so somebody with some conscience said, "Look, my God, Iran is not Iraq. My God, let's not them let them do Iran." Okay, and so they said, "Well, let's get a national intelligence estimate," because the pretext or the reason would be Iran's getting a nuclear weapon, right? And Israel has the right. So they looked around for somebody to do this estimate, and some honest guy. They couldn't find any. Couldn't find any in the CIA. They went to the State Department, to the head of their research and their intelligence. His name was Tom Finger. Reluctantly agreed. He took some of his own friends, his own officials with him. He came up with a NIE after working for all of 2007, November 2007. Conclusion, key judgment: Iran stopped working on a nuclear weapon at the end of 2003 and has not resumed work on a nuclear weapon. This was unanimous, all 16 intelligence agencies at the time, and it was expressed with high confidence. Oh my God! Well, long story short, I can prove by Bush's own memoirs that prevented the attack that they had planned to do with Bibi Netanyahu against Iran. So what's the deal now? Why did I mention all that? Well, if Tulsi Gabbard does what she can have done, she commissions an estimate, okay? She gets people together and says, how close is Iran now to a nuclear weapon? And curiously enough, every year since 2007, the U.S. intelligence community has been honest on this one issue, at least, okay? That Iran has not started working on a nuclear weapon, okay? Other facilities, of course, but not a nuclear weapon. So if she commissions an estimate now and make it a special, we call them an SNIE, okay? Have it done in a month and give it to the president and tell the president, look, this is the threat from Iran. And by the way, if someone attacks Iran, they have these kinds of what they call hypersonic missiles that we're working on, but we don't have yet. And they can hit Israel real big time. So you should know all these things, Mr. President. This is the function of intelligence. This is the way it is. You decide, but this is what you can expect to counter. Wow, that would be really good. Will he have time, or will Netanyahu think now that Trump has blessed the breaking of his own sponsored ceasefire, that he'll bless just about anything? And does not Netanyahu see a reason for maybe even domestic political reasons to do this? Or I think he may, I don't know. But if he does, what will Trump do then? All I'm saying here is he has a golden opportunity to be able to do what Congress really did, because Congress commissioned that estimate in 2007. So somebody's got to be sensible and say, look, Mr. President, not only is it not a good idea, but the reason that the Israelis will give, namely that they're close, really close to a nuclear weapon. I think Rubio, somebody said, maybe it was Blinken, oh, they're just a week away or something like that. That's 6 months ago. That's BS. And what the president needs to have is a straight story on that. He can get it, and he picked a good person to lay on that estimate. I hope she does that, because there's great strength in having honest people gather the community together, and if there are dissents, record them, put them in footnotes or whatever. Don't make it all so an ideological attempt to tell the kind of story that they think the president wants to hear.
Thank you very much, Ray McGovern. Everyone, go to raymcgovern.com for all of Ray's good work. You can see what he's going, what he's doing. And of course, I'm sure there'll be a link to this. I'll send Ray a link right after the show. There'll be a link to this and all of his other appearances and the articles that he writes and all the work Ray does, his bio, and going back for years. So if you want to really an opportunity to see a lot of what Ray is doing, just go to raymcgovern.com. Also follow Ray on X. And keep up with all that he's doing. As always, follow me on Rockfin, follow me on Telegram. In the case that anything ever happens with YouTube, I'll be there. You'll know whether to find me in a hurry. If you can afford to donate, that's great. If not, we got Patreon and PayPal and Buy Me a Coffee. If you can't, that's okay. Just share this on all your social media platforms. Thank you very much. We are out.